Who exactly is the Zodiac Killer? That is the question that has plagued the minds of millions, and while there may be some that say this is already an open shut case, with the suspect being found in Arthur Leigh Allen, yet that is not quite the case, and as of 2023, the Zodiac crime case is still officially open, with no true definite suspect. On this list of 9 potential suspects, being the Zodiac, Arthur Leigh Allen may actually have the least amount of evidence against him. You are now within minutes of horror, and your only chances of survival is hitting that like button. With that being said, let's continue on with the video. Oh yes, the 9 people on this list were all suspected at one point for being the Zodiac Killer, and they all have some pretty convincing arguments. We're going to start with the man I just made a video on, the scarred veteran, Gary Francis Poste. In 2021, an investigative team called the Casebreakers said they solved the mystery of the Zodiac Killer's identity. They pointed the finger at Gary Francis Poste, a California-based house painter who died in 2018. According to the investigators, a team made up of former cops, military intelligence officers, and journalists, several things about Poste made him a likely Zodiac Killer suspect. For starters, he had distinctive scars on his forehead, which investigators claim that the murderer shared. Explained in a press release, the Casebreaker stated there is photographic proof, as a former FBI agent put it, of irrefutable scars on our Zodiac's forehead, spotted by 3 witnesses and an observing cop, then later passed on to the 1969 San Francisco Police Department sketch artist. Seeing Poste's photo next to one of the police sketches of the Zodiac Killer helps put things in perspective. The investigative team also believes that removing Poste's name from one of the Zodiac Killer's infamous ciphers reveals a new message, and they point to a paint-splattered military wristwatch found near the possible Zodiac victim, Sherry Jo Bates, in Riverside, California in 1966. They believe the watch could belong to Poste, who once served in the United States Air Force. What's even more intriguing, many who know Poste acknowledge that he could be a killer. While living in Groveland, California, Poste reportedly recruited young men in town into a criminal posse. Poste even allegedly confessed to being the elusive serial killer to one of his recruits. Poste also had a very violent history with even his own family, to the point that his own wife said, "This man is very evil, and I know his very dark secret." But not everyone buys Gary Francis Poste as a Zodiac Killer suspect. One expert on the case, Tom Voigt, told Rolling Stone that the Casebreakers' claims about Poste were completely bogus and hot garbage. Voigt says that the police sketch of the Zodiac Killer didn't really show scars on his forehead, and that it was just shading to fill in the picture. He also adds that there are other, much more compelling Zodiac Killer suspects out there. I'm not going to do a deep dive into Gary Francis Poste because I did make a video on him that is pretty compelling. Now, someone did call me an idiot for making that video, saying there's no way Gary Francis Poste could be the Zodiac Killer. And I'm like, how do you 100% know that this man is not the Zodiac Killer? Do you know something that I don't know? Where were you in 1960 that you can say this man is not the killer? Now, I'm not saying Gary Francis Poste is the Zodiac Killer. I only report what is in the news, and sometimes I'll give my own opinion about it. I'm not making this up. I'm not pulling it out of thin air. I am just stating what is in the news and what people are finding as factual. Just like the Idaho 4 case with Brian Koberger, there are some people that'll go above and beyond if you make any negative video about Brian Koberger, the suspect who is sitting in jail without bail for the possible slayings of 4 college students. If you say anything negative about him, people will beat your ass. It's not like, okay, yes, he might have did it, but there is not sufficient evidence against him to say that he committed those murders. I need to wait for more evidence to come out. This case doesn't feel right to me. That's one thing to say that, right? I've said that before. But then you have some people that actually feel like they conceived this man. They feel like they're his parents. You'll have people be like, oh, don't you talk about my Killburger. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Like, they really go above and beyond. Like, I'm just reporting what's in the news. Relax. It's sick, it's weird, and I don't like it. Anyway, let's continue. The compelling case for Arthur Leigh Allen. A 2007 film about the Zodiac Killer, Zodiac, portrays a man named Arthur Leigh Allen as a likely suspect for the Zodiac Killer. But though the movie was a work of fiction, Allen's connections to the case are very real. Investigators have been able to tie Allen to a number of the Zodiac Killer's crime scenes. He lived near Zodiac victim Darlene Ferrin's workplace and may have even stalked her, frequently visited Lake Berryessa, where the Zodiac Killer attacked Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, and was possibly in Riverside when Sherry Jo Bates had her life ended. What's more, Allen owned a distinctive watch that featured the same crosshair symbol as the Zodiac Killer signed his ciphers with and wore on his chest during the Lake Berryessa attacks. Tom Voigt additionally reports on his Zodiac Killer website that Allen told a friend he was writing a novel about the murderer called Zodiac, who would end the lives of couples at random. The reality is that Allen is the suspect you just can't quit. Voigt explained to Rolling Stone, I just can't quit that Big Al. If he wasn't the Zodiac, he might just be responsible for some other crimes. But though some experts see Allen as a strong suspect, others aren't so sure. Physical evidence like DNA, fingerprints, and hard-writing samples fail to distinctively tie Allen to the notorious murder spree. And some still ask, if not Allen, who died in 1992, then who was the Zodiac Killer? Allen to me comes off as somebody who was a true crime fanatic and probably obsessed over the Zodiac Killer. Doesn't mean he's the actual suspect, but just somebody that went crazy over whoever this was. And depending on the time he was writing the book and had the symbol on the watch, it could explain a lot. Like if all these news articles came out and then Allen wrote the book, he just could have been just some random guy that liked true crime. Richard Guykowski, the newspaper editor who went berserk. According to the same Tom Voigt who I mentioned multiple times in this video, one of the most compelling Zodiac Killer suspects is Richard Guykowski, a San Francisco newspaper editor who bears a striking resemblance to police sketches of the murderer. With Voigt stating, Richard Guykowski is my best bet. If I was an employer looking to hire the Zodiac, he'd probably have the most impressive resume in my eyes. As Voigt says on his Zodiac Killer website, Guykowski was the editor of a counterculture newspaper called Good Times from 1969 to 1971, the same time period that the Zodiac operated in Northern California. The paper's production schedule kept Guykowski busy on Wednesdays, which happens to be the only day of the week that the Zodiac never mailed a letter. One of Guykowski's former colleagues claimed that Guykowski was the Zodiac and that the editor had invited him to commit violent crimes together. Voigt additionally points out that a Zodiac Killer cipher appears to contain a variation of Guykowski's name, and that the Zodiac letters abruptly stopped around the same time that Guykowski was involuntarily committed to the Napa State Hospital after going berserk. The murderer didn't send another letter for about 3 years. So was Guykowski the Zodiac? Not everyone thinks he's a strong suspect. A San Francisco police inspector described Guykowski's former colleague as one of the top 3 Zodiac kooks, and Guykowski claimed that he was out of the country at the same time as one of Zodiac's attacks, though according to Voigt, his passport says otherwise. The tantalizing theory about Lawrence Kane. To some, Lawrence Kane, who also went by the name K, seems like the best Zodiac Killer suspect of all. Several eyewitnesses spotted a resemblance between Kane and the Zodiac. The sister of a victim claimed that a man resembling Kane had previously bothered her sibling at a restaurant. A police officer who caught a glimpse of the Zodiac after one of his attacks agreed that Kane bore a resemblance to the Zodiac, and a woman who may have escaped from the Zodiac also picked out Kane's image as her would-be abductor. What's more, a French engineer named Faikal Zeroui claimed in 2021 that he'd cracked 2 of the previously unsolved ciphers that the Zodiac had sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, and according to Zeroui, one appeared to spell Kane's name, hinting at the Zodiac's identity. Faikal believes that cipher Z13, which begins in English with the phrase, "My name is," can be decoded to read K-A-Y-R. To many online sleuths, this seems tantalizingly close to Kane or K. Kane served in the Naval Reserves, where he could have learned to write coded messages, and Voight writes on his Zodiac website that Kane suffered from brain damage following a 1962 car accident, which reportedly left him unable to control self-gratification. However, many criticized Faikal's findings after he released them online in 2021, since investigators have failed for decades to solve the Zodiac's remaining ciphers. Many expressed doubts that Faikal could have cracked the code so quickly and so easily. When he says that he took 2 weeks to crack the Z32 and an hour for the Z13, I think that sums it up pretty well, one of the commenters wrote, according to the New York Times. Kane, who died in 2010, took any secrets he might have had about the infamous Zodiac to his grave. But when it comes to the question of the Zodiac's identity, there are still several other intriguing possibilities. Ross Sullivan, a notorious suspect in ending the life of Sherry Jo Bates. There are a couple of reasons why some believe that Ross Sullivan was the Zodiac, but most compelling has to do with the homicide of Sherry Jo Bates, who some consider a potential Zodiac victim in 1966. On Halloween, Bates' body was discovered on the Riverside City College campus, where the 18-year-old had just started her freshman year. According to Voight's Zodiac website, she had been beaten and stabbed. Sullivan was one of the original suspects in ending the life of Bates. He worked at the campus library, which was close to where her body was found, and several of his co-workers at the library remembered that he made them uneasy. He even briefly disappeared after Bates had her life ended. Though Sherry Jo Bates isn't considered an official Zodiac victim, the way her life was ended has struck many as eerily similar to the Zodiac's crimes. It is reported that local newspapers received letters after Bates' death with details that only the suspect would know, and that those letters bore a resemblance to the Zodiac's letters, included word usage and misspellings. What's more, Sullivan's possible connection to Bates isn't the only reason why. Some think that he's a convincing Zodiac suspect. Sullivan studied cryptology, wore army boots similar to the prints that were found at the Zodiac crime scene, and with his thick spectacles, he bore a strong resemblance to the Zodiac. Today, however, Sullivan's whereabouts are unknown, and since Bates is not officially considered a Zodiac victim by the police, though she is by some experts like Voight and the Casebreakers, her homicide might not have anything to do with the Zodiac or his mysterious identity. Richard Marshall, and why some people believe he is the infamous Zodiac. Between 1969 and 1974, the Zodiac sent over 20 letters, usually to local newspapers in Northern California, and certain details that he mentioned in the notes have led some people to believe that the Zodiac was movie projectionist and ham radio operator Richard Marshall. The Zodiac often dropped hints about his life and interest in his letters, and many of them aligned perfectly with Marshall's, Both like the film The Red Phantom, both apparently lived in basement apartments, and both liked felt tip pens and unusually sized paper. When Marshall was approached as the suspect, he stated, "I must have a double floating around," Marshall said during a 1989 TV interview in which he also professed his innocence. "The characteristics you mentioned fit me almost to a T," Marshall stated.
Like me, but the fact is that the characteristics you just mentioned fit me almost to a T. I really am startled at the mass and accuracy of the detail, and obviously if they had been that forthcoming about that at the time, I would have understood why they were investigating me. My innocence notwithstanding, the details do fit.
As Voight explains on his Zodiac website, Marshall first emerged as a Zodiac suspect in 1976 after he made suspicious comments over his ham radio, but some investigators don't think he's a strong suspect. "Marshall makes good reading, but not a very good suspect in my estimation," said Napa County Sheriff's Detective Ken Narlow. Voight also acknowledges that detectives visited Marshall at a care facility shortly before his death in 2008, and they somehow determined that he was not the Zodiac. But they didn't, to the best of Voight's knowledge, test Marshall's DNA. Therefore, in my opinion, Voight wrote on his site, "Marshall remains a viable Zodiac suspect." Earl Van Bess Jr., the Zodiac suspect who was accused by his son. When author Gary Stewart was asked about his thoughts on the Zodiac's identity, he had a curious response. In his 2014 book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, Stewart alleged that the mysterious suspect had been his biological father, a man named Earl Van Bess Jr. Stewart, who grew up with adoptive parents, was inspired to learn more about his biological father after his biological mother reached out. Van Bess had eloped with Stewart's mother when he was about 27 and she was just 14, and according to sources, later served time for sexual assault. But that's not why Stewart thought that his father was the infamous Zodiac. Stewart learned that Van Bess liked ciphers and the opera, especially the Mikado, which the Zodiac referenced in his letters. What's more, an expert said that he had similar handwriting to the Zodiac. Stewart also believed that his father and the Zodiac shared animosity toward the same journalist. San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery reported on the Zodiac and received a Halloween card allegedly from the Zodiac that read, "Peekaboo, you're doomed, from your secret pal." Avery happened to be the same reporter who'd covered Van Bess' sexual assault trial. But though Stewart's book promised to solve the mystery of the Zodiac's identity, critics found his methods lacking, and executive producer Ross Dinerstein and director Keith Davidson started to develop The Most Dangerous Animal of All into a documentary series. Their private detective said that Van Bess' handwriting, fingerprints, and DNA didn't match the Zodiac's, and that Van Bess had been in Europe during the crime spree. Still, Dinerstein is keeping an open mind about the Zodiac's identity. "I don't think we're ever going to know who the Zodiac is," he told a magazine. "I would be surprised if Earl Van Bess Jr. is the Zodiac, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Earl Van Bess Jr. was involved or had some connection to it." The chilling case against Jack Terence. No, not the guy from The Shining. This is another Jack Terence. Like Gary Stewart, Dennis Kaufman claimed that the Zodiac had been a member of his family. In 2007, he alleged that his recently deceased stepfather, Jack Terence, had been the infamous Zodiac. Kaufman offered the FBI several pieces of evidence, including a hood that his stepfather owned with the Zodiac symbol on it, writing samples, and a bloody knife, and a roll of film. In addition, he claimed that his stepfather had ended the life of Kaufman's mother. Plus, Kaufman claimed that he had even spoken about the Zodiac's identity to Terence, who never denied that he could be the Zodiac. If I wrote a book and said, I think my stepfather is the Zodiac, they wouldn't believe me anyway, Kaufman told his stepfather. Terence just laughed and then quipped, why would you put I think on there? Terence had also served in the Air Force and the Navy and knew about cryptograms, and a handwriting expert seemed to believe that Terence's handwriting bore a strong resemblance to the Zodiac's. But Terence has largely been dismissed by law enforcement. The evidence that Kaufman gave the FBI was apparently not very compelling, and some investigators have questioned the credentials of the handwriting expert who examined Terence's penmanship. Paul Alfred Dorr, one of the most recent Zodiac suspects. Jared Kobeck, in his 2022 book, How to Find the Zodiac, Kobeck found Dorr a compelling suspect for a number of reasons. Highly intelligent and violent, Dorr's writings mirrored some of the Zodiac's letters. He was part of a militant group called the Minutemen, who used a symbol that was similar to the Zodiac's, and Dorr had a military background, which some suspect that the Zodiac shared. Kobeck's research was allegedly so extensive that Dorr's own daughter, Gloria, eventually admitted that she was impressed with the work Kobeck had done. San Francisco Gate called Dorr the most compelling Zodiac suspect in decades, and Paul Hines, who co-wrote the Golden State Killer book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, called Dorr the best Zodiac suspect that ever surfaced. But not everyone is convinced. There are those that argue against Kobeck's findings against Dorr, an argument rife with confirmation bias, and Kobeck admitted that, though he turned over all his evidence to police, they never contacted him. Kobeck stated, I think Dorr is a pretty good shot at it. I can't blame law enforcement if they ignore it. These guys get like 10 tips a day about how someone's cousin or whatever is the Zodiac. So who was the Zodiac? Other suspects have been suggested over the years, including Guy Ward Hendrickson and Donald Lee Bujak, but none so far have convinced the FBI that the Zodiac's true identity has been discovered. According to them, the case remains open and unsolved. You could be passing by the Zodiac in a supermarket. He could be lurking in your backyard. Or you just might be listening to the Zodiac right now. Oh my Koberger. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, please like, as any engagement does help the channel grow. Once again, thank you so much for your support.